National History Project will discuss the conflict of how video games are so addicting and the history of them. It will also talk about the first video games and the companies that made them. It will also discuss the compromise of people that can help with video game addiction.
How long before you decide? Before I know what it feels like. Where do I go? If you never try, then you'll never know.
The first video game, Tennis for Two, was created by William Higginbotham in 1958. He used an oscilloscope, which is similar to a black and white TV. Tennis for Two turned out to be a real crowd pleaser, but the screen was only 5 inches wide. In 1959, a 15-inch screen was made, and a new Tennis for Two was made with different gravity settings. The new patent for the game was bought by Magnavox in 1971, and Magnavox released it that year. The first arcade game, Space War, came out in 1971. Space War was the predecessor of Asteroids. Space War used a joystick and had a sun and a more accurate gravitational pull. Steve Russell, nicknamed Slug, was a typical video game nerd. Space War was actually created by this hacker when he tried to make an interactive video game. The first video game console was the Magnavox Odyssey, which came out in 1972 and cost $100. The Magnavox Odyssey uses 6 cartridges to play up to 12 games. But in the games that had a score, people had to keep it themselves, since the Odyssey didn't. Pong came out in 1972. The same year, Nolan Bushnell made Atari. Pong sold in Sears stores and was a huge hit. After that, Atari stuck to home video game consoles instead of arcade games. Video games have defined entertainment for this generation, more to come. They have affected businesses and buyers everywhere. Americans now spend more money on video games than movies. 80% of kids have at least one video game or video game system. Video games seem like something that males would play, but 39% of gamers are actually females. Video games are fun, but some people don't know when to stop playing them. Cody Posey killed his family due to the violence of the game Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Rockstar Games, the creator of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, was sued because of the killings. But Sony, creator of the PS2 that the game was played on, hasn't cared about it yet. There are hundreds of other crimes due to video game violence and other things like divorces. For example, Jocelyn bought her husband World of Warcraft for Christmas in 2004, and he played it for 10 hours a day. 9 months later, she divorced him and moved out. There has been over 30 different video game systems and countless arcade games. There has been thousands of video games and tons of merchandise based on those games. There has been black and white, color, 3D, 2D, side-scrolling, and many, many different kinds of different video games. It's gone from 8-bit to 16-bit to 36-bit to 480p, and now people use high-definition 1080p. Video games have evolved from a dot going across the screen to a huge digital world. Video games can now be played on a cell phone, a personal computer, a TV, a Palm Pilot, or a portable video game system. There are even prototypes of all kinds of new ways to play video games. Nintendo has blown people away with its most insensitive Wii console. Most modern video games also support online play, which redefines the fun of video games. 67% of Americans play video games, and the average gamer is 33 years old. The first actual video game company was Atari. After that, tons of others were made. It usually takes 10 people about 2 to 4 years to make a good video game, and hundreds of games come out every month. There are creators of the video games, and then the company that published the video game. Like how Microsoft published Gears of War by Epic Studios. Well, first the video game is brainstormed, and then the creation process starts. Voices, cutscenes, levels, and all kinds of other things are put into the game. and then it is demoed to see if there are any bugs or glitches. Then those bugs and glitches are fixed, and it is demoed again. After that, it is rated, and the release date is set. Finally, the buyer can purchase the video game that they've been waiting for so long. Video games have affected companies a lot since they were made. It is a compromise with how tons of companies have been made, but it is also a conflict of how many more go out of business as different ones are made. Atari was a hit in the 70s and 80s, but it had to sell itself for $28 million later. But the video game sales have increased very greatly in the past 10 years. In 2004, for example, 248 million video games were sold in the United States. The video game industry has been growing ever since more people are realizing how amazing video games are. There are more and more reasons why to play video games, and one is the achievements that Microsoft came up with. Achievements are rewards you get for playing video games, and I'm sure that other companies will be doing the same thing soon. Video game addiction has been a rising conflict, though. The American Medical Association doesn't know whether to call video game addiction a mental illness or a form of addiction, but video game addiction only affects 10% of gamers. Normally, being addicted to video games has the same side effects as being addicted to drugs. If video games are played for too long, the player loses interest in other things like going to the restroom, eating, and in some cases sleeping. The good news is, though, that there is help for video game addicts. There are therapists and other people that can help with video game addiction. There has been quite a few debates over how video games should be rated. Some people think ESRB is rating games M for mature that should be rated AO for adults only. Video game publishers don't accept AO games, and a game that is rated AO has to be remade or cancelled.
This was a triumph. I'm making a note here, huge success. It's hard to overstate my satisfaction.